Hello, my name is Jerry Russell, and I'm a teacher at Apopka High School. And this is a attempt to teach the new 2020 AP World, AP European DBQ with only 5 documents. And this is for my students, but any other kids obviously can look at it. Okay, so let's get started. You don't have to take notes on this. My students don't. This is just a tutorial, but you might want to try it, or at least keep it around to refer to when you're actually writing your own DBQ tomorrow when I assign it. All right, here we go. If you're not one of my students and you want to get a copy of the DBQ we're doing, you can email me at this address to get that. All right, so what you're going to do whenever you get a DBQ is you get a prompt, a question, and then you get some historical background. And here is the prompt. Okay, use the following documents. Using the following documents, analyze the effects of the Cuban Revolution on women's lives and gender relations in Cuban period from 1959 to 1990. Whenever you see the word analyze, that's usually a pretty good, easy DBQ because basically you can come up with 3 different logical groups and be fine. So analyze or discuss or evaluate, those are not very common in AP World. They're very common in AP European. By the way, this DBQ that we're using here, this shortened version, is from it was designed for AP World, but the same rules would work for AP European and APUSH as well. Okay, so anyway, here's the question. So what you're going to have to do in your thesis and in your essay, you're going to have to address women's lives, how they changed, the effects of the Cuban Revolution, which was the socialist revolution, and how it affected gender relations, and that means relationships between men and women. All right, most of these DBQs give you a historical background, and here's the one that goes with this essay. It says Cuban revolutionary Fidel Castro assumed power after overthrowing the dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista, January 1959. Castro then began a radical restructuring of Cuban society along socialist lines. Now, neither AP European or AP World, my students, got this far this year. This would have been in the final unit, but we did talk about socialism quite a bit. And so you know that socialism was the idea that you should blur the distances between rich and poor or erase them altogether. And so in AP European, at least, and AP World, we got into the Russian Revolution. That was the first socialist revolution. But anyway, Castro, so you haven't gotten this far, but it's not going to hurt you to understand this. All right, so there's the historical background. You cannot use any of the facts here in the historical background to get credit, okay? It's just to help you to understand. You can refer to them, but you're not going to get any points for using this. This is not outside evidence. All right, so we got the question and we got the historical background. Now let's go crunch the documents. Remember, we're going to be looking for women's life, changes in women's lives and gender relations. Okay, so what I want you to do is just take your paper if you're going to actually do this with me, and normally you'd number 1 through 5, but for this time, just write 2, 3, 6, 8, and 10, because this DBQ that I'm using, these are the 5 documents I chose. Because remember, this year there's only going to be 5 documents on the exam. So I took a DBQ with 10 documents and got rid of the other 5, and we're only using 5. Okay. All right. So it'd normally be 1 through 5. So just number this on your paper, and we're going to go through the documents, and you're going to jot down your first impressions. Okay. So here's the first document. It's by somebody named, I always tell my students to read who said it first, the attribution line. Sometimes it's at the top, sometimes it's at the bottom. Who said it and when they said it. So this is Yolanda Ferrer, female politician, General Secretary of the Federation of Cuban Women. And actually, why don't we at this point have you pause the video and read it yourself. Okay, now that you read it, what this is basically saying is that, hey, after the revolution, the revolution happened in 1959, the next year, 1960, all this happened to change women's lives. And I think most people would probably think that this made women's lives better. Okay, so anyway, down here at the bottom, I'm going to put what my first impressions would be. Because remember, that's what you're doing. You got to do this entire DBQ in 45 minutes. So my students will already be programmed. I'll tell you to have a paper numbered 1 through 5 before you even, the day before the exam. You'll already have all this. You'll have your paper numbered, and we're going to do many of these between now and then, and some abbreviated versions as well. I know that does not fill you with joy to know that we're going to do lots of DBQs, but I can tell you that if you want to pass the exam and make this year's work count and save yourself a bunch of money and your parents a bunch of money when you go to college, this is what it takes. All right. Anyway, the general consensus I think most people would see is that this made women's lives better. So on your paper next to number 2, you would write better. Okay. And ignore what it says here about document number 1. I actually started this with 7 documents, and then remember that it was 5. So ignore that. I should have cut that out, but I didn't. Anyway, sure, it sounds like things are better. So we're going to just write better down. Now, let's go ahead and look at Caps or Hippo. Let's see who said this. Now, she's saying the socialist revolution made women's lives better. Okay, who is she? She's a female politician, and obviously politicians say things for effect, and she's making a speech. And we don't know who she's making the speech to, but her job is she is general secretary, and that's basically the same thing as chairman or president of the Federation of Cuban Women. So the fact that she's a woman speaking about changes in women's lives to a group of women, or she's in charge of this group of women, that should have some bearing on Caps or Hippo, as you see here. Now, again, you don't want to call somebody a liar. You don't want to say they're fudging the facts. You just want to take this into account. So because she is probably in Cuba making the speech, we don't know where she is, but she's head of this organization of Cuban women, and she's making a speech about how the revolution changed women's lives, and Fidel Castro in 2003 was still very much alive and very much in charge. She's probably going to be tempted to say things made things better. Okay, so I'm going to say point of view. Now remember, Caps or Hippo, whichever you use, it has to be 2-part. Okay, so I'm putting my 2 hands up here. You can't just say, of course this is from a woman. Well, here's what you have to say. Okay, you analyze the document, and you say this thing says that it made women's lives better, and then you say, of course, this is from the point of view of a woman who is not only a Cuban woman, but she's in charge of the Federation of Cuban Women. So it may be that she wants to, highlight how much better women's lives are. So it's possible she might exaggerate. I don't want to spend too much time on this because we're going to do this again later in the second video when we talk about how to actually write the DBQ. So anyway, what else could we have said here? You could have said this is audience, because remember that's what the A stands for in caps. You could say, of course, this is directed to an audience. You could talk about that. We'll do that later. All right, the first thing when I did would have been fine. I'm just trying to say Caps or Hippo was very easy to do. There's multiple angles you could take. Okay, so that's document 2. We think it makes things better. All right, document 3. Who said this? This is a male Cuban revolutionary sympathizer, which means he likes the revolution, and he was interviewed in Cuba by an American in 1969. So Castro's been in power 10 years. Here's what he says: I'm against women's liberation. Now this is really pretty funny. I'm against women's liberation. Most of the older generation is also. The revolution gave women a lot more freedom by giving them jobs, so now they don't depend on their husbands. I think that's not right. I expect my wife to stay home and look after the house. She has plenty to do here. She owes herself to me and the children. I'm tempted to make some jokes here, like, yelling at my wife to make me a cup of coffee. But the deal is, this I think is a gender relations one. I think what this is saying here is that it probably made men and women not get along as well, or it may have hurt men's feelings that women did not depend on them so much. So anyway, I'm going to throw this into the category of gender relations. So in your notes, just write gender relations and then put, say, trouble question mark. And it does not go with, it says here 1 and 2, but it does not go with document 2. Document 2 said this made women's lives better. This one seems to say that men and women did not get along after this happened as well. All right, Caps or Hippo, again here, Hippo. I'm tempted to make a joke, but I would say Of course, this is from the point of view of a man who probably, that's the first part, who probably is unhappy that his wife does not listen to him as much or depend on him as much. And there's the second part. Doesn't mean he's lying. Again, you never want to say somebody's lying. You just want to show how that might be a factor. All right, moving on. Okay, document 6. This is a fascinating document because when you look who wrote this or who said it, this is Castro's daughter. And it says here, I know a lot of you don't know what the word exile means, but that's someone who's left their country in a very unhappy manner, is in living in another country. So this is an exile's memoir of Cuba, published in the United States. So let's pause the video and you go ahead and read this whole thing. Okay, so it was published in the United States. Anyway, she's saying things are bad. I mean, you know, she needed time off with her baby and they kicked her out of college. So I'm going to put this in the category of this made things worse. So it looks like we have our third group here. Our first group being it made things better. Second group saying it made trouble between the gender. And this one saying basically it made things worse for women. When you see what I did with the thesis, you'll see what I'm going with here. You could have come up with something different, but clearly this is saying that this did not make women's lives better. All right, and for Caps for Hippo, oh, you could have a lot of fun with this one. Obviously, we haven't learned about the Bay of Pigs or Cuban Missile Crisis and all that, but some of you, know about those subjects anyway, those topics anyway. But the deal is, she published this in the United States, which means she left her father's country and came here and was very critical. And so I've got that for point of view. I've also put audience here because, listen, this is her memoir. She's probably trying to sell a book. And she's trying to publish a book against her father in the United States. So maybe she made him sound worse than he really was because she knows most Americans don't like him and she wants to sell books. Again, don't accuse her of lying, but of course, this is one way to look at, audience or point of view. Moving on to the next document. Document 8. Now, this is a chart, and basically, I want you to pause the video and look at it. All right, I need to pick up the pace here a little bit. I got to be done in 3 minutes. If you look at this, you'll see that women's literacy in Cuba went up dramatically, and the fact that they started making money, that went up dramatically. So we're going to throw this in the category of it made women's lives better. And here we go with that. And I just wrote here that you probably wouldn't do caps on this. You can do caps on a photograph. You can do caps on a table, but maybe in this case, we wouldn't do it. Let's go on. All right, document 10. And I'm going to let you pause the video to read it. Okay, and so again, this is a woman talking probably to a group of women, and she's making a speech, and she's saying, hey, things are better, but listen, men are not doing their job. And so women are taking on more responsibility. They're working and they're taking care of their house and their children. So they have a double shift. This sounds like a lot like something an American woman would say. So we're going to put this in the worst category and maybe even in the gender relations one. Remember, you can use a document more than one category. It's actually considered very advanced, but I don't think you're going to have time to do this. Point of view, she is president of a women's federation, so she may want to emphasize how hard it is on women. Again, be careful with this because you don't want to offend your AP reader because they're human and they have prejudices too. Moving on to the next slide. All right, here's the rubric, remember. Pause it and look at this. So obviously we want to do contextualization and thesis, and we have to do it in the first paragraph. Okay, so here's all the facts I came up with. I'm going to click all the way down here and pause it and read over these. This is just my summary of what was going on in Cuba at this time. Okay, so my signature saying is BS with an S. Here, taking all that, here is my introduction. Here is my, and if you see everything, I put it a little bit differently. There may be some typos here because you're going to be in a hurry, but this is my contextualization. I guarantee you this will give you a point. Next thing we have to do is our thesis. And here's the document groupings. Now, for those of you in my class that are used to me doing a DBQ chart, there it is. Here's another way of doing it. And here is my thesis. And if you understand, it came straight out of those 3 groupings. And it's going to feed right into your body paragraphs. And A, B, and C corresponds to my DBQ chart. And you can see right there that I'm addressing how it changed women's lives and gender relations.